No one in Duskwater knew her real name anymore. They just called her the widow in the orchard, because her cabin sat at the edge of the trees where apples no longer grew. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the ridge, she lit a fire. Same spot, same stones, same silence. And every evening, no one came. Children dared each other to spy on her from the wheat fields, whispering that she'd gone mad, waiting for a ghost. But she didn't shout, didn't curse, didn't cry. She just knelt on the same patch of dirt, laid one apple blossom beside the flames, and stared into them like she was listening for something. The firelight made her face look younger, like it burned through time, but her eyes were dry and too still for a woman her age. Some nights, she placed a worn cavalry coat across her lap. Other nights, a rusted harmonica sat in the dirt beside her, untouched. No one ever saw her eat. No one ever saw her leave town. Yet that fire never failed. Tonight, the wind blew stronger, tugging her long gray shawl behind her like a flag of surrender. The flames sputtered, then caught again, taller than before. Across the field, hidden between rows of sorghum, a small figure crouched, knees drawn to his chest, arms folded tightly, watching her. He'd never seen a white woman like this. The others in town shouted or ignored him, threw stones or scraps. But this one, she hadn't moved in nearly an hour. The boy shifted closer, silent as a deer, his moccasins brushing dust off the dry earth. Closer now, he could see the glint of something in her hand. Not a weapon. A locket. She turned it over once, twice, then placed it beside the fire, open. Inside, a man's face, faded but proud, wearing a blue uniform with buttons that looked like gold. The boy leaned in too far. A twig snapped under his heel. Her head turned sharply. For a moment their eyes met, his wide with fear, hers calm with something else. Recognition? Memory. She didn't speak. She just looked at him, then back at the fire, and whispered to the flames, "It's not tonight either, is it?" The boy didn't run. He didn't speak. He just watched the fire rise higher, as if it was calling someone neither of them could name. The boy didn't come back the next night, nor the next. But the fire still burned, same time, same spot, as if her hands moved on clockwork born of something deeper than time. In town, folks noticed. At the Mercantile, Mrs. Berridge muttered to anyone who'd listen that the widow must be conjuring spirits. "Lighting fires every night for 20 years? There's something wrong with that woman," she hissed. But none of them had ever stood close enough to see the tremble in her hands when she struck the flint, or the care with which she placed that locket in the same groove in the soil. No one had seen what the Lakota boy saw. Her cabin, barely upright, her woodpile shrinking, the orchard trees long dead, and still the fire. The truth was, long ago, before the war swallowed up husbands like hers, she'd promised to light a fire every night until he found his way home. She made the vow in the presence of God and wind and prairie stars, thinking she'd only wait a season. She was 22 then, and her belly was round with the child he never got to meet. The baby didn't survive the first winter. The letter from the army came in spring. And still she kept the fire. At first, neighbors brought food. Then they brought advice. Then they brought distance. She stopped answering the door, stopped cutting her hair. All that remained was the promise and the flame. On the fourth night after seeing the boy, she whispered differently. "I saw your eyes," she said to the fire. "They weren't his, but they weren't strangers either." She didn't expect anyone to hear. But a sound came from the orchard. A low crunching of leaves, followed by the gentlest voice she hadn't heard in years. "What do you burn for?" The widow turned slowly. The Lakota boy stood just inside the line of trees, barefoot, holding something bundled in cloth. He looked half-starved but proud, eyes steady like someone older than his bones. She looked at him, without surprise. "To remember what was," she said, "and to see what might still come." He stepped closer and placed the bundle at her feet. When she unwrapped it, she found 5 apples, shriveled, bruised, and imperfect. He'd found them near the dying trees. She didn't ask how. She just looked at him, and, for the first time in years, offered someone else a place by the fire. He didn't speak much after that. The Lakota boy came at dusk, always barefoot, always with something small in hand. Wood shavings carved into animals, a feather twisted with string, a handful of moss that still smelled like rain. He never explained them, and she never asked. He sat across from her, just out of reach, watching the flames the way some children watched their mothers. The widow never told him her name, and he never offered his. But every night, the fire grew easier to light, as if it responded to their quiet understanding. On the 7th evening, she brought out a second blanket. Folded, clean, smelling faintly of cedar. She didn't hand it to him. She just placed it on the stump across from hers and turned back to the fire. He sat on it that night, then the next. Still, he didn't speak of himself. But she began to notice things, scratches along his arms, a torn thread in his collar that had been re-sewn with care, the faint bruise near his ribs he tried to hide when sitting. She recognized those marks. She'd seen them on her son once, when a neighbor's boy got rough and no one had stepped in, except her husband. He always stepped in. That thought came with pain so sudden she stopped breathing. She stared into the fire too long that night, and when she blinked again, the boy was standing, eyes fixed on something behind her. She turned and saw nothing, just the dark cabin, the sagging roof, the empty rocking chair that hadn't moved in years. "I think he used to sit there," the boy said softly, pointing. His voice was high but calm. "The man with the blue coat." Her blood turned cold. "What did you say?" she asked, too sharply. He looked at her, then the fire. "He had gold buttons. I saw them. But he don't come now." Her hand trembled on her lap. She reached into her coat and pulled out the locket. "This one?" she whispered. The boy nodded. He sat by the fire. But he was crying. She stared at the boy like he'd broken the rules of her silence. Then she rose, walked into the cabin for the first time in days, and returned with 2 tin cups and a small tin of coffee she'd saved since spring. She didn't ask who the boy was. She just poured and said, "Sit." It's a cold night for ghosts. The next morning she found tracks, small, bare footprints leading from the orchard to the back of her cabin and looping near the edge of the woods. They weren't his. The Lakota boy's steps were always light, careful, never reckless like these. These prints dragged slightly at the heel, as if whoever made them was tired or limping. She followed them halfway, then stopped. She'd forgotten what it was to feel watched in daylight. The orchard still bore no fruit, but beneath the dead branches signs of life stirred. A branch had been snapped low, revealing a cavity in the trunk of one of the larger trees. Inside it, tucked beneath dried grass and cloth, was a carved figure. Primitive, but clearly a soldier, its chest marked with the same button-like dots as her husband's old uniform. She brought it inside, not because she was frightened, but because something about it felt unfinished. That night, the boy arrived later than usual. Dirt clung to his knees and arms, and he carried nothing but silence. She noticed the way he looked at the locket differently now, not with curiosity but memory. "Did you carve this?" she asked, showing him the wooden soldier. He didn't answer at first. Then, "It's not him." not really. But it's the last face I saw." The widow steadied her hands. "Where?" He didn't blink. "In the place where white men keep things they don't want to remember." Her throat tightened. "A prison?" He nodded. "A fort. I was small. My sister was smaller. The man in the blue coat gave her a peach. Then they took him away. The others didn't feed us. But he did." The fire crackled louder between them, as if reacting to the words. "Your sister?" she asked. "Gone now," he whispered. "She was too little." She reached for the soldier again and set it beside the fire. "That man, did he ever say his name?" The boy paused, searching memory. Then, he used to whisper it, holding the peach pit. Said it wasn't his real name, but it was hers. Said it meant home. The widow froze. Her husband used to call her Solena. His name for the cabin, the orchard, the place he swore he'd return to. She hadn't heard it aloud in 20 years. The fire shifted suddenly, spitting sparks. Neither of them moved, but something had begun to awaken. The days began to stretch, not with joy, not with certainty, but with something alive. She started brushing her hair again, not because anyone might see her, but because the wind had begun to lift it differently, like it mattered. The Lakota boy came each night without fail now. They never spoke much, but something passed between them. Trust, maybe, or the kind of stillness that only grows when two people carry grief the same way. One evening, just before dusk, she found him kneeling near one of the orchard trees, brow furrowed, fingers buried in the soil. "They're not dead," he said plainly. She blinked. "The trees," he nodded. "Sleeping, like people do when too much sadness comes at once." It sounded foolish. And yet, she crouched beside him, ran her hands along the bark. It was cold, but not dry. "How do you know?" she asked. "Because I sleep like that too sometimes," he said, and stood. That night she didn't just light the fire. She prepared a stew, thin but warm. She placed an extra bowl out without thinking, as if the fire deserved to eat too. He arrived carrying something wrapped in cloth again. Not apples this time. Bones. Clean, polished, carved. He placed them gently on the ground. "Buffalo?" he said. "I don't hunt them, but I find what others leave." She watched him arrange them in a circle beside the flames, his hands steady. "Why bring them here?" He hesitated. "Because this is the only place that still waits for something." Her throat tightened. She looked past the fire toward the open fields, the road no one ever came down anymore. "I think I waited so long I forgot why," she said. "You remembered," he replied. "You kept the fire." She didn't respond, but that night before going inside, she did something she hadn't done in years. She turned to the trees and whispered, "If you can hear me, it's time." The wind moved through the orchard like breath. And the next morning, when she stepped outside with her kettle, she saw one thing that stopped her cold. A single bud, tight and pink, curled at the end of a branch that hadn't bloomed in 2 decades. She didn't say a word. But her knees gave out, and she wept, not for her husband, or her son, or even herself, but for the stubborn, impossible return of hope. That evening, she opened the cedar box beneath her bed. It had remained sealed for 21 years, wrapped in the same cloth she'd used to swaddle her infant son the day he stopped breathing. Her fingers trembled over the lid, not from fear, but from the weight of everything left unread. Inside, beneath a folded bonnet and her husband's last army button, was the letter. The one sent months after he died. She'd never opened it. She couldn't. Not when she'd already buried both his name and their future in the same winter. But tonight, after watching a boy resurrect trees with belief alone, She knew she had to face it. The envelope was brittle. The seal broke easily. Her eyes scanned the page slowly, choking on lines that blurred together. "To the widow of Sergeant Malcolm H. Dane," it began. But it wasn't just condolences. There were details, ones she'd never known. He'd been injured and taken to Fort Sully. He'd spoken of a wife who lit fires, said she would wait, said she needed to know he still loved her, even if he didn't make it home. And then the words that burned her skin. He died protecting 2 Lakota children caught in crossfire, refused to leave them even when he could have escaped. 1 girl survived. The boy was unaccounted for. She dropped the paper. Her breath came fast. The boy. The peach. The name whispered to the pit. She rose to her feet like something had struck her from the inside out. That night, the fire burned higher than ever, fed not just with wood, but with memory. She placed the letter gently into the flames and sat beside it, heart pounding like hooves on dry earth. When he arrived, he noticed her eyes were wet, but not from grief. "You knew him," she said quietly. "You don't remember, but you did." He didn't reply, but walked to the fire and sat closer than usual, the heat touching both their faces. "I think he gave you a piece of his love," she whispered, "and you brought it back here." He looked at her, puzzled, then offered her the harmonica he'd found days earlier buried beneath a root. "He played this," the boy said. "I remember the sound. It made my sister laugh." She took it in her hands, held it to her lips, and played the first note she'd dared to touch in 2 decades. It wavered, but it reached the trees. The boy didn't show up the next night, or the one after. The fire still burned, and she still played the harmonica. 1 trembling note each time, as if trying to call someone back who might have never left. But the stump across from hers stayed cold. She told herself he might be sick, that the cold air had grown sharper and his clothes were thin, but deep down, a voice she hated whispered. Maybe he was never meant to stay. On the 4th day, she walked further than she had in years, through the orchard, across the field, past the rise that once held the last cavalry outpost. All that remained now was a collapsed fence and a stone with no name. She knelt there, pulled a piece of charcoal from her pocket, and wrote the word Solena on the stone. It wasn't his name, but it was theirs. As she turned to leave, a sound caught her, soft and irregular, like breath through leaves. A figure moved between the trees, slower than a deer, too tall for a child. She reached for the small blade tucked in her apron but stopped when she saw him. Not the boy, a man, native, silent. He wore worn leathers and a braid bound with turquoise, but his posture said more than his clothes. He wasn't here to hurt her. Still, her voice came out hard. "Who are you?" He didn't answer at first. Then he reached into the folds of his cloak and pulled out a carved wooden soldier. Another one, identical to the boy's. "He gave this to me," the man said. "Said I'd find his mother near the orchard that still dreams." Her knees went weak. "You know him?" "I knew his sister. She died in my arms." He looked away. "He don't speak of it much, but he remembers your fire." She felt something inside her crack, not in pain, but in awe. "Is he all right?" she asked. "He's trying to become more than a memory," the man said. "He follows the wind now, but he told me to tell you. The fire made him believe people could wait for each other." Her hands clutched the harmonica. "And you?" she whispered. "Do you believe that too?" He looked at her, and his eyes, so much like the boy's, softened. "I think I might now." Then he turned to leave, but stopped. "You ever play for someone besides ghosts?" She smiled for the first time in 20 years. Maybe tonight. She lit the fire as always, but this time she placed 3 things beside it: the harmonica, the carved soldier, and a small wooden bowl filled with the last of her summer honey. She didn't know why, only that the man's words hadn't left her since morning. He follows the wind now. She wondered how long the boy had been doing that, how many towns he'd passed through, how many fires he'd sat beside, hoping someone would ask him to stay. The sky had turned a deeper blue than usual that evening, as if the air itself had softened. And for once, the wind didn't blow the smoke away. It curled upward, slow and heavy, drifting toward the orchard like a signal. As the first stars blinked into the sky, she lifted the harmonica to her lips and played, not a single note, but a tune, one her husband used to hum while fixing fence posts, something without words, just rhythm and memory. She didn't care if it sounded right. She just let it out, breath shaky but sure, until the tune filled the night like a story the wind had been waiting to hear. And that's when she heard it. A second sound, a low whistle, high and sweet, echoing her tune from somewhere past the trees. She stopped playing, stood slowly. The bowl of honey was gone, not spilled, taken. She turned toward the orchard, and there he was, the boy, kneeling by the same tree that had bloomed once and then gone quiet. He held the bowl in his hands, head bowed, as if offering thanks to something she couldn't see. She didn't call to him. She just walked toward him, slow, careful, until they stood face to face. He looked up at her. "I came back because you didn't stop playing," he said. She knelt beside him. "And you didn't stop listening." He reached into his pouch and pulled out something wrapped in deerskin. She unfolded it and found a torn piece of military fabric, embroidered with a single word: Solena. Her husband's final request, his name for her, and their home. "I think it's yours," the boy whispered. Her hands closed around it, gently, reverently. It always was. Behind them the fire crackled, not just warm now, but alive. And for the first time in decades, she wasn't waiting. She was welcoming. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, she did something no one in Duskwater had seen in over 2 decades. She stepped into town. Her gray shawl was tied neatly, her boots freshly brushed. Her posture had changed. Not youthful, but rooted. Women stared. Men tipped their hats awkwardly, as if unsure whether to greet a ghost. She walked into the mercantile and laid 2 coins on the counter. 2 loaves, and thread if you have it. Mrs. Barrage blinked. "You sewing again, Mrs.?" She paused, realizing no one remembered what came after Mrs. The widow straightened her back. Solena Dane. The name echoed through the room like a hymn. Even the bell above the door rang differently when she left. That afternoon, the boy helped her hang a new cloth above the cabin's doorway. No longer torn, no longer dull. She let him carve a symbol into the lintel, a rising sun over an open palm. "It means welcome," he told her, in the way we say it. "You're not staying, are you?" she asked, not bitter, not begging, just honest. He shook his head gently. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I think I left something here." That night, before lighting the fire, she brought out a second harmonica. Her husband's old spare, one she had buried deep in the floorboards long ago. She handed it to him. "In case you need to play for someone else's ghosts," she said. He held it like it might vanish in his hands. "Will you keep the fire going?" he asked. She thought for a moment, then shook her head. "Number not like before." His eyes dropped, but she smiled. "This time, I'll light it when someone's coming, not when someone's already gone." He looked up. Then I hope to see it again? She touched the side of his face briefly, brushing back a strand of hair. You will. You already have. As he disappeared beyond the orchard's edge, she sat by the fire, not waiting, not mourning, but holding warmth for whoever needed it next. And in the darkness beyond, just for a moment, the wind shifted, carrying her name through the trees like a promise finally fulfilled. Solena. 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 Spring came early that year. The orchard bloomed in defiance of everything it had suffered. Branches once gray with grief now shimmered with pink, as if morning had been pulled from their roots. Children from town crept closer each day, no longer to mock, but to see, to listen, and sometimes to sit. The stump across from the fire was never empty anymore. Some nights it held a child with questions, other nights a traveler passing through. Once, a woman with a black eye who stayed until her tears dried. Solena never turned anyone away. She didn't call it charity. She didn't speak of healing. She simply lit the fire, again and again, and let it do what it had always done. Burned through the silence. One morning a stranger arrived on horseback, a Lakota man with a carved staff and eyes that knew things without asking. He stood at the edge of the trees, not intruding, just watching. She knew him before he said a word. The boy, grown now, taller, stronger, but still carrying that stillness in his chest like a second heart. He stepped forward, not as a ghost or a guest, but as someone returning to something he had helped build. In his hand, he held the harmonica. I thought it was time I played for you, he said. She smiled, and for the first time, the lines around her eyes didn't look like sorrow. They looked like sunlight. He played softly, the same notes she'd once offered to the wind. Behind them, 2 small children peeked from his saddlebags, twins, dark-haired, sleepy-eyed, blinking at the orchard as if it were something holy. He said nothing about their mother. She didn't ask. Instead, she gathered 2 bowls, 2 spoons, and poured soup before they even dismounted. That night, the fire burned not as a signal of loss, but of place, of return. The harmonicas played in turn, the twins nestled between them, and no one asked what came next. They didn't need to. The porch light glowed, the trees sang, the fire cracked in rhythm with breath, and far beyond the orchard, where memory once lived and sorrow used to sleep, only warmth remained. Not grief, not ghosts, just the echo of a boy who came when no one else did, and a woman who stopped waiting and started welcoming. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Echoes of the West. If you had seen her there, would you have stepped in too? Tell us in the comments.